Okay, turned it off. I am not going to deal with the phone anymore. I'm not going to be bothered because you know what? All the ding ding dings are just stressing me out. There you have it. Stress. What is stress? What do I mean when I say "Ugh," and just turn off the daggone phone? Um, what do I mean by stressing me out? Well, what is stress? What is stress? Um, what can cause stress? How does it affect us? How do we deal with it? Um, what is this thing called stress? Well, first of all, stress is this kind of state of tension, state of anxiety. Stress is this, if you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get this done. Oh my gosh. That's stress. It's this feeling of being overwhelmed. It's tension, anxiety. It's like this feeling of being overwhelmed. That's what stress is. So stress is the actual feeling. A stressor is the thing or event that's causing the feeling. Okay. Well, what happens? First of all, we have something that's causing a reaction, like my phone dinging. Okay, getting a text causes a reaction. Okay. If my phone was dinging at 3 a.m. in the morning, or my phone started ringing at 3 a.m. in the morning, my reaction would be probably not good because I would be like, oh my gosh, what's going on? That would be my primary appraisal. My primary appraisal is that first reaction. Okay, that's your primary appraisal. Secondary appraisal is after you've sat back, what are my options? So, for instance, you go to school and you go to class on the first day and you get a syllabus and you look at it and you're like, oh my gosh, look at all the stuff they're making us do. And then you sit back and you say, okay, well, I can do this and this and this and this, and you get a plan of attack. That's the secondary appraisal. The secondary appraisal is kind of looking at all the options. The primary is kind of the first cut. Okay? And so we have, what is stress? Stress is that anxiety or tension. We have your first reaction to it, your primary appraisal, then your secondary appraisal. Well, can stress be good? Yes, stress can be good. There's such a thing called eustress, which is good stress. Good stress is that little bit of stress that can push you. I have one of my sons play soccer, and there can be such a thing as good stress, the coach pushing them to perform. As long as it's pushed to the right extent and not too much, that can be good stress. You're being pushed in a class. It's challenging. It can be good stress as long as it's at that, Vygotsky would say, zone of proximal development. As long as it's being pushed to the right amount, it can be good stress because it can push you to do things that you didn't know that you could do. So yes, you can have eustress. Stress can also stress doesn't always have a bad effect on our performance. You would think, oh, I'm all stressed out and I'm going to do terrible. You might think, oh, stress makes people do terrible things. Not necessarily. A little bit of stress can up your performance because it peps you up. It gives you that push. The coach giving you the push to do well. That can be eustress and it can cause an increase in performance. However, too much stress can harm performance. Now, when does stress help versus hurt someone's performance? Well, it depends on how much stress and what you are performing. A little bit of stress can be helpful, a lot of stress can hurt, and the harder the task, the less stress we can handle. So if you're doing an easy task, you can deal with more stress while you're doing it. If you're doing a hard task, it doesn't take much to put you over the edge. So that's how stress and performance kind of work. And then we have the prevalence of stress. How many people have stress? Has stress gone up or down recently? Well, if you look in textbooks, you can look and you can see the majority of people say they have at least a little bit of stress. It varies from person to person, varies by age group, it varies by income level. They did studies looking at during the time of the recession, did people's amount of stress go up? Yes, it did, and it went up for certain people more than others. Income levels, is stress related to income level? Yes, it can be. If you are living paycheck to paycheck and wondering where your next meal is going to come from, it can cause stress. So poverty can cause stress. And we're going to talk about later what leads to happiness, so the other end of that. So finances can be related to stress. Relationships can be related to stress. Prevalence, it's not just an easy answer. It's not just an easy answer to say this percentage of people have stress in their lives, because you can say, well, what kind of stress? What type of stress? Has it increased or decreased recently? It's more complicated than that. So then we have sort of the physiological ideas behind stress. There is the fight or flight response, which is when you think of stress, you think of something traumatic happening. You think of sort of walking down the road and he's having footsteps behind you. Or you think of being attacked. And that's this, think of the fight or flight. Is you feel like you're up against a wall and your choices are twofold. Your choices are either fight or flight. You can either fight it or run away from it. It can be physical, like physically attacked. You can be verbally attacked, and you either fight back or you pull away and run away from it. Or it can be something that's happening in your life. It can be you have an exam, and you can either fight, which is you get out your stuff and you study, or you can flight. You can run away and ignore it. That's the fight or flight. It's that you have that choice. Well, another researcher took it a step farther and came up with this thing called general adaptation syndrome. And that is what happens if stress doesn't go away. Talked about that first reaction is alarm. That's that fight or flight response. And then we go into what's called resistance. Okay, you have that fight or flight response. You deal with it. You put on a happy face. You motor on. You keep on keeping on. You plug through. That's resistance. Okay? The thing is, everything may seem okay on the outside, but on the inside, you still have that, you're still revved up physically. And that's the resistance. You can only keep that up for so long. After a while, if the stress doesn't go away, you get into a stage called exhaustion. And that's when you start seeing the physical effects of stress, because the body basically starts giving up. The body can only take it for so long. And that's exhaustion. So we have alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. Well, what is the physiological basis of stress? The most common is the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal. Your hypothalamus sends a message to your pituitary gland, sends a message to your adrenal glands to put out stress hormones. And that's when all those hormones are put out that can affect your body. Okay? So getting to that, that's the physiological effects. We're going to go into sort of what causes stress, how stress can affect your health, how people deal with it, and then happiness. So, what causes stress? Well, let's look at the types of stress. There's chronic versus acute. Acute stress would be short-term stress. It may be something that is decent size, but it doesn't last for very long. It's a short-term stress. It might be exams. It might be a presentation at work. It would be acute stress, something that you're stressed about, but it's not going to last for the long term. Chronic stress is stress that keeps on for the long term. A prime example of chronic stress would be poverty. It's not something that goes away quickly and easily. Chronic illnesses would be another aspect of chronic stress. It's not something that just goes away. It's something that's there for the long haul. Then you have different things. You have traumatic events or catastrophes. If you go through a natural disaster, that's going to cause stress. Anybody that goes through something that's traumatic, they've gone through abuse, okay? Somebody who was in the military and was in combat, traumatic events, that can cause stress. So traumatic events, catastrophes. We also have significant life changes can cause stress. Those changes do not have to be negative. Getting married can cause stress. Why do you think they talk about bridezillas? Getting married can cause stress. Having a child can cause stress. Significant life changes because you have to adapt. And sometimes it can make you feel overwhelmed. And that's the stress aspect of it. Daily hassles. Something doesn't have to be significant to cause stress. Just day-to-day life can cause stress. Just the things you're dealing with. Having to do homework. Having to deal with your parents or your siblings or your friends. The relationship stuff can cause stress. If you're a mom, trying to get your kids to pick up after themselves can cause stress. Getting to work, traffic can cause stress. Daily hassles. Now, the interesting thing is, what causes the most stress? Significant life changes, traumatic events, daily hassles? It depends. If you have enough daily hassles and they last long enough, they can cause just as much damage as a significant life event or a catastrophe. So daily hassles can build up. It can sort of enough of them put together can be just as bad as something major. So it depends. Depends on what they are, for how long. Another thing is, there's two other things, job stress and conflict and self-imposed stress. Job stress, job strain, job burnout, basically thinking about being at a job which you don't like, but you feel like you have to be there because you need the paycheck. A job where you feel like you're asked to do more than you are capable of. Again, it's this feeling of not being able to handle it. It's this out of control feeling. Okay? There's a lot of people that have significant amounts of job stress. A job where you feel like you could be fired at any moment can be stressful. So it's workload, the stability of your job, okay, a lot of things you're dealing with. If you are dealing with a lot of things on your job, if you are a social worker and you are dealing with a lot of life drama, then that can cause significant amounts of stress. So jobs can cause stress. Conflict can cause stress. Now, when I say conflict, I don't necessarily mean people arguing. Conflict is when you have to make a decision. And there's three different kinds. There's approach, avoidance, and avoidance. Approach would be you have two potentially good things and you have to choose between the two. For instance, great, you're going to go to college. You have two options. Which one are you going to choose? Or you want to buy a car and you have two cars that you're looking at. Which one are you going to choose? They both would work. That's approach. Approach avoidance would be one thing having both positive and negative consequences. A prime example of this would be You can go out and hang out with your friends, but you have a test the next day. So you really should be studying. So that one act, going out and hanging out with your friends, has both positive and negative consequences. So are you going to choose to do that or not? That's approach avoidance. Okay? Because it can have both positive and negative consequences. Avoidance is where you have two options and neither one is really good. Okay? So you have to choose between the two options. And look at this. My phone's ringing. We're talking about stress. Okay. How do you deal with that? How do I deal with my phone ringing? That's the next thing that we're going to talk about. Coping. Well, how am I dealing with it? Right now, I'm using what's called problem-focused coping. I looked over to the phone, and it said, number unavailable. So I said, I don't know who it is. I'm going to let it ring. If they need something, they will leave a voicemail, and I will call them back. Problem-focused coping. I'm dealing with the actual issue. Should I answer the phone or not? I'm making a decision. I'm dealing with the issue. Okay? Emotion-focused coping would be dealing with my response. Okay? With dealing with your emotions surrounding the stress. So, emotion-focused coping, and you can have something that kind of serves both purposes. A lot of times when I get stressed, okay, I make a list. And it serves both purposes. It serves problem-focused and emotion-focused coping. Because it makes me feel more in control, okay? And it actually helps deal with the issues. Speaking of that, predictability and control. One of the things that helps us deal with stress is when we can at least feel like we've got a handle on it. We feel like we're in control over it. We feel like we have a plan. Another thing is if we feel like it is predictable, which kind of go together. Because if we can predict it, we can plan for it and use proactive coping. Okay. Some other things. This idea of learned helplessness. Some people deal with stress by not dealing with it. I have seen sometimes in classes where people just give up. They have tried different ways of studying and it just hasn't worked, and they finally are just like, no matter what I do, I'm going to fail. So, to heck with it. And they just give up. Learned helplessness, that's what learned helplessness is. Learned helplessness is this idea of you feel helpless. You feel like there's nothing you can do. You are out of control. You just give up. And thankfully, I don't see that often, but it is not pretty. It's not a state that you want somebody to be in. Instead, you would want people to use some of their supports. Social support. Social support is looking to other people to help deal with stress. Social support, other people can give us support emotionally. They can give us a shoulder to cry on. They can give physical support, giving us money, giving us information, okay? Giving us ideas and information. So any of the three, ideas, information, giving us actual physical things, or giving us emotional support, that different people can help us. Other stress reduction techniques, things like deep breathing, relaxing, meditation, those can help. Also the sense of the use of humor. That's something that they didn't really talk about in the book, but laughing things off, telling jokes, that can help reduce stress. It really can. And a lot of people use that as a stress reduction technique. So, and another good stress reduction technique is exercise. Pound it out on the pavement. go for a run, go take the dog for a walk. That can help get your mind off of it, plus it's good for you physically. That can help people deal with stress. Other things talking about coping is these ideas of hardiness and resilience. Hardiness is just somebody who psychologically is strong. In other words, they can deal with things that come at them. They have the mental fortitude to handle it. Resilience is somebody who's gone through the ringer and come out successful. Looking at resilience, what are some things that predict resilience? They've looked at people who grew up in very bad situations but came out okay, and two things seem to stick out. One is cognitive abilities. And I'm not talking about book smarts or academic smarts necessarily. Talking about problem solving ability. People that have cognitive abilities in terms of being able to solve problems. That, when I talk about intelligence, that's the kind of intelligence. Looked at that. School type smarts helps because that's a way for people to climb out of things. Getting an education is a way for people to make something of themselves in terms of, especially financially. So, cognitive abilities and having a role model. Having an adult who was a role model, who was there, having a social support of an adult role model. Does it have to be a parent? No. Could it be a parent? Yes. That's what they found. People that were resilient tended to have one or both of those two things. Okay, so that's how we cope. What happens if we don't cope? What happens in terms of stress and health? Well, stress can negatively affect our immune system. A little bit of stress can actually help us to stay stronger. But it doesn't take that much to overwhelm us and to get to that exhaustion stage. And so stress can have a negative effect on the immune system. Significant amounts of stress or stress for a prolonged period of time can cause us to not be able to fight off illnesses. Can also cause cardiovascular issues. You've heard of type A, type B personalities. Type A personalities where you're always competitive and you're always driven. With that, there's this anger, hostility, this I gotta be number one. That can lead to heart issues, cardiovascular issues. Stress can also be related to asthma and tension headaches. Asthma, both indirectly and directly. Directly, stress can trigger hormones which can aggravate asthma. People can get stress-induced asthma. If you're stressed, a person who has asthma can think, oh my gosh, I'm going to have an asthma attack. And thinking I'm going to have an asthma attack can actually trigger an asthma attack. So it can be a psychological trigger. Indirectly, stress can also cause people to do behaviors that can aggravate asthma or aggravate tension headaches. Stress can cause somebody to smoke, which can aggravate asthma, for instance. Stress can cause people to eat unhealthy things, which can cause physical illnesses. So, both indirect and direct effects. You can see stress relating to tension headaches, asthma. So stress can have health effects. Okay, so we have what is stress. We had a little bit about the physiological basis of stress. We had how do people cope with it. We have how does it affect health. What about the other end? What about peace and happiness and joy? Think of the opposite of stress, not stress. What are some elements of happiness? Peace, tranquility, joy. Those are some elements of happiness. Contentment. Okay? Think of all those nice words. People being satisfied and content. What are some factors contributing to that? Relationships, having stable, good relationships. That's one factor that is you always see when you look at what helps in terms of general well-being, psychological well-being, relationships, physical health. Having good physical health relates to happiness and well-being. Okay. What about money? Can money buy happiness? Yeah, to an extent. Generally, money, in terms of having enough to be comfortable, yes. More than that, not really. There comes a point where more money doesn't really buy happiness. If you have enough money to get rid of some of the stressors that poverty creates, then that can make a difference. But beyond that, no, not really. What about, there's two other things, positive psychology and flow. Positive psychology is this new branch of psychology looking at, taking a view of, we don't want to look at the problems. We want to look at models of good adjustment, models of people having good behavior, and what's behind that. In other words, models of people behaving altruistically, models of people who would consider themselves happy, models of people who are successful, and what's related to that. What are factors behind that? That's positive psychology. Another thing related to that is this idea of flow. When we're talking about happiness, you're talking about people who are satisfied. There was this researcher named Csikszentmihalyi, really long, weird name, had this idea of flow. And this idea is, have you ever been so engrossed in something that you were really working on it, and then you looked up and suddenly 2 or 3 hours have gone by? You just lost track of time, you were so engrossed in it. That is the quintessential description of flow. It's this idea of being really cognitively engrossed and into something, and being really productive. That's flow. And that's the goal. If you're thinking about what is the goal in terms of people being productive and leading a happy, peaceful, joyous life, is to have that idea. All right, that's stress. Think about what causes you stress. How do you deal with it? Does the way you deal with it work, not work? Why not? Stress is a part of life. The question is, how bad is it? What does it do to us? And what do we do to cope?